Hello, everyone. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I do love the energy. Well, let's begin. So good morning again. My name is Aliyah Ranjit-Singh, and I'm an assistant professor in the Africana Studies Department and the Caribbean Studies Program. And I'm also on the Wolf Institute's Board of Advisors for the academic year 2024 to 2025. And today I'm very happy to welcome you to Writing for Remembrance, Release and Resistance, Teaching at the Intersection of Ethnic Studies and Creative Writing. This event features Brooklyn College students in education and Puerto Rican and Latinx studies, along with BC graduates in the K-12 classroom, in conversation with Brooklyn College professor and last year's faculty associate to the Wolf Institute, Dr. Carla España. Let me put our hands together. In times when ethnic studies and literature by marginalized voices face censorship and removal from curricula, the experiences of people from the global majority must be amplified and integrated into all learning spaces. Dr. España will present her book, Narrative Writing with Latinx Teens, Testimonios, Text, and Teaching with Brooklyn College students and alums in conversation on schooling, curriculum, ethnic studies, and teacher preparation. Narrative Writing with Latinx Teens features testimonials from New York City students and educators and multimodal writing activities using poetry, middle grade, and youth adult literature. So a couple of things before we invite Dr. España to come to the front. So this event today is part of a 7-part series the Wolf Institute is hosting to celebrate books by Brooklyn College faculty. We invite you to join us next Tuesday, March 18th at 6 p.m. online for a celebration of Professor Serene Cater's book, For Feminism, Why We Fall for White Feminism and How Can We Stop? How We Can Stop. And next Thursday, March 20th at 6 p.m. for a celebration of Professor Megan Ference's book, Matatu Work, Gender, Labor, and Mobility in Nairobi. So the information to register is on the flyer you would have received when you signed in. 2, I also want to invite you to join us the first week of April for HES Week 2025, a series of events organized to honor the work of this year's HES Scholar in Residence, Melissa Murray, professor at NYU School of Law, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, and a legal analyst and host at MSNBC. So 26 speakers, 7 public events, 4 days, urgent conversations with leading legal experts on abortion, democracy, the use of history by the courts, the future of individual rights, the role of the courts in our democracy, podcasting, and of course, our collective future. We are very excited for these events and hope you will join us. And of course, please grab a flyer when you leave to learn more about the schedule for that week. 3rd, I'm almost to the end of this list, right? If you're a student and if you didn't sign in on your way in, please sign in on your way out. And finally, this event is being recorded and it will be housed on the Wolf Institute's YouTube channel. So before I read Dr. España's official bio and turn over to her, I want to say that Dr. España and I started Brooklyn College as full-time faculty, as assistant professors at the same time, and she has been an amazing colleague and very much supportive, and congratulations to you. So now the bio. Dr. Carla España is a New York-based educator from Chile. She's an assistant professor of bilingual education, Puerto Rican, Latinx, and Latin American Studies in the Department of Puerto Rican and Latinx Studies at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. Dr. España is the author of En Comunidad, Lessons for Centering the Voices and Experiences of Bilingual Latinx Students, and Narrative Writing with Latinx Teens, Testimonios, Text, and Teaching. Her journey began with bilingual 6th graders at Don Pedro Albizu Campos School in New York City. So can we put our hands together as we invite Dr. España to the front.
Thanks for your support. What a treat it is to be in community with you all. Thanks to those of you who showed up in person and those of you who are watching online. I appreciate not only the support for this book, but also for our students and this really important topic. And so I wanted to start, like Aliyah said, this is my teaching journey. It began here at Don Pedro Albizu Campos. It's in Harlem. And I was a transitional bilingual education and dual language bilingual education teacher there. I was teaching 6th grade and then 7th grade English as a new language for my last year. For those of you who are here in person, because I can't keep up with in person online, but what do you notice in these pictures? What do you see in my classroom? You can shout it out. Yes, books, they're books, yeah, and they're like in bins, right? And what do you notice with the colors of these bins? Right, there's like a blue side, there's a red side. Well, at that time in my school, they're like, well, when we teach dual language, we want you to keep all the things that are in English, the books in English in blue, the signs, and you write in blue marker if you're writing in English, and everything else for Spanish. It was very divided. Right, and I had all these questions as I started teaching about, well, that's not like how my life is as a bilingual person. It doesn't really reflect the reality of how language works. But what else do you notice maybe in the picture on the side? What's kind of like the layout of the room? Yeah, you see the crates, there are milk crates on the bottom. So I set up a little meeting area. So we had a lot of gathering in the morning. We had morning meetings. We would do read alouds. I would read in the front. I had groups. And so that's the beginning of me thinking about these matters of education, of bilingualism. And I owe a lot of who I am today in education to what the students taught me there. And then I went and I've spent some years in different capacities teaching in independent schools. And this is De La Salle Academy. It's on 43rd Street, smack in the middle of Times Square. Very different neighborhood than the Harlem neighborhood I taught. And this is a school for academically talented, low-income children in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade who can't afford your like fancy, really expensive private schools. And I was there with these students pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, not post because we're still in all these times, but during the COVID shutdown of summer 2020, I was with them online, and they taught me so much about how do you build community in different ways when you are virtual. And I was reading a lot of poets with them. So I featured David Bowles, who was a professor, UT Rio Grande Valley, and then also a translator for Nahuatl indigenous language, Safi Alhelo, a poet, Sudanese American by way of DC, Jason Reynolds, our prolific writer. And these students just came to life when I brought in poetry and film and documentaries, and we wrote our own poems based on the ones that we would read in class, like this social distancing one by Juan Felipe Herrera that you see the shape of the poem is a circle. And then we all responded to what it feels like to live during a pandemic and what we were witnessing around from our windows or online. And then I'm here, right? So some of you, raise your hand if you were here for this event. This is a picture of Woody Tanger. Yes, thanks for your support, and Wolf Team always. So I featured these young adult authors. I invited them here. So I had Lorraine Avila, also former Bronx educator, Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed editor, Cericia Fennell, Honduran Garifuna Black author. I had Camila Torre Tavares, When We Make It author, Elizabeth Velasquez. A lot of you are When We Make It book fans. I know you've read that novel in verse and you love it. And the fabulous Albizu Boy, who had her roots here too in Brooklyn. So that event was really, it shaped a lot of what I thought as a professor here, because I think it was Manuel was here for that event, right? And I think we were talking after that, and you'll hear from Manuel a little bit later today, but the impact of literature that speaks to our experiences. And that, I mean, it was maybe 1 hour that these authors were here and talking to us, but they radically shifted the way we thought about the power of writing, and how I think it was you, Manuel, who at the end, you were like so confident at the end, you're like, I want to tell my story. Like I too can be a writer. I'm like, yes, I'm so glad you came to this event. And so that leads me to the state of publishing now and the work that I do and the research that I do in children and young and youth literature. And as you see, or you cannot see, but you can see online for those of you looking at the stats online, this is from the Cooperative Children's Book Center that gives us the stats every year on books by certain authors from different groups and books about and that represent those groups. So like 9% books in 2023 that they received, all of the books that were published in 2023, only 9% were about Latina children. The numbers are low. They're dismal. This is not right. And so we have a lot of growth in publishing, but also this is my subversive goal in every class that I teach at Brooklyn College, is that you too can tell your story. And so I'm here to tell you that it can be done, and I'm happy to connect you with scholarships and organizations that will support your writing journey. And now I'm doing this work with New York City public schools. I've been doing these workshops with teachers, and as you see, this is in Spanish because I'm doing a whole series with New York City public school teachers on teaching young adult and middle grade and picture book on all this literature in Spanish, and how I have to address the shame around Spanish, but also the ideas about language of which kind of Spanish is better than the other, and where does that idea come from. And so we talk about this term racial-linguistic ideologies, and I get to talk about that maybe for 5-6 weeks with New York City public school teachers, but you can talk about that for a semester with Professor Mena, who teaches a course on this topic. Hi, Professor Mena, woo! And you're teaching it this semester. Yes, okay, so I'm grateful that I had that opportunity, but I'm even happier that you get to explore these themes and these issues in our courses here at Brooklyn College. And I bring in books like When We Make It or Y Si Lo Logramos that takes place in Bushwick. It's a novel in verse, and we have this disclaimer in all the work that I do with the teachers that we will advocate for multilingual and bilingual students. We will accept with grace and not judge our own bilingualism, because a lot of us come with shame around our language practices, and my job and my responsibility as your professor here or as a facilitator in New York City public school workshops is to help us question why and see where that shame comes from, and that we need to integrate the diverse language practices of people from the different diasporas and accept these translations that are authentic and that are lovely. If I had well, I was gonna say $1, but that wouldn't be enough. Because you know when people say, if I had $1 for every time somebody, or if I had $1 for every time somebody said this, I would pay my student loans, but that's not right because I would need more than $1 for every. But I oftentimes get requests that these emails sound like, oh, Carla, can you send us a book list? I'm ordering books for my school. I get this email a lot from principals or teachers. But we need authentic books in Spanish, like not translations. And I'm so horrified by that. I'm like, there are authentic, beautiful translations for different books in different languages. And so I like advocating these authentic translations. And so that brings me to my research. This is what a 6th grader said in a research study I did on narrative writing in an English as a new language classroom. And this student was writing about their life and their personal narrative. And they said, in the story about when they came to this country, I told my mom, I miss you a lot, Mom. And my mom started screaming, and me too. I started screaming. This was the moment. It was very sad. It was the saddest moment of my life, the worst moment of my life, because I was going to be separated from my mom. And this is a child, 6th grader, a Dominican student who had come from Dominican Republic, whose mother couldn't come. And then I asked, why did you write this? And they used the word desahogarme. I wanted to write desahogarme, to release, to unburden how I felt when I came here without my mom. My mom didn't come, but now I'm going to be more calm because the rest of my siblings are coming. I miss how she treated me, how she helped me with my homework in Santo Domingo. So this was my first research study as a doctoral student at the Graduate Center. A lot of Graduate Center representation here, yes. And it was life-changing for me because I spent time learning from middle grade students of how liberating it felt for them to be in a classroom where their teacher allowed them to use their full language repertoire. And that meant features from different types of Spanish and English in that specific neighborhood and classroom. Some students decided to translate everything they wrote, and I asked in my interviews, because I interviewed the students and the teacher, why'd you do that? Is that a requirement? Does a teacher say you have to translate everything? And every student that I interviewed said, I do that because I want to help my parents. And for several of them, it was helping their parents with citizenship proceedings and taking their citizenship exam. And so in this classroom, I found that writing was very liberating, right? The students can desahogarse, they could unburden and feel that release. And it was because the teacher created this environment of freedom and this environment of safety that you can explore your languages this way. And that's why in this book, I call the framework that I use in chapter 1 to inform all my lessons in the rest of the book, Writing for Desahogo. And so this book is the coming together of my experience as a middle grade English and middle grade bilingual teacher, as well as my experience as a scholar and researcher in ethnic studies and bilingual education. So that means that to me, when I think about teaching young people to write and to tell their stories, I want to start with what are their testimonios. And I have my students here from my teaching, of course, this spring semester on banned books and banned and censored books by Latinx authors. And we started the semester looking at Testimonios as a research methodology, thinking about the power of this tradition from Latin America that speaks truth to power and uses the oral storytelling that gets recorded and shared and in order to speak back to something that is not right. It is not. And so I want to start with the student testimonials, and I want to move into bringing in these texts. And I brought a lot of on the piano here, you'll see displayed the books that I feature in my book, in the lessons, so that students can write and process their experiences. I can plan my instruction that way, and always, I can't do this work alone. So every chapter in my book ends with educator testimonios. And so you'll meet some of them through here, you'll see them here, but you'll meet them in the book. Some of them are in the classroom. Some educators are in administrative positions across New York City. I feature all New York City educators at the end of each chapter in my book. And then the lessons, I decided to, because of the attacks and a lot of censorship on books and books being banned, but also in ways that I have experienced as an educator in New York City, where I have been told not to invite certain authors to my school, or I have been told not to use a certain book, and I've pushed back and asked why, and I want people to name that. I decided that in my lessons, I want to introduce you to different texts through multimodal ways, videos, music, poetry, middle grade, and young adult literature. And so my hope is that as readers, whether you are an English major, bilingual education major, a gen ed or sped education major, or you're a teacher already in the classroom, I'm hoping that you see this as a way of an entry point into the possibilities of using these texts and what it might mean to teach. So some of the texts I feature, all the texts that I feature actually, the right way. I always say, I can't expect the teachers to try something out and feel vulnerable in their writing and using books if I don't start myself. So I thought I would start, before I preview the text, with a poem from one of the units here. And it's a poem that was inspired by me sitting in the Highlights Foundation. Do you all remember the Highlights magazines? Right? Okay, some of you are really too young, maybe you haven't seen them. So all of us who went you know our age. So we would go doctor's appointments or dentists, and in the waiting room, they would have these magazines for children. And so the Highlights magazines, you recognize, but Highlights is also a place. It's a foundation, it's an organization, and it supports writers. And they're in Pennsylvania. And I got to attend a retreat. And one of the facilitators, author Alex Villasante, whose book I feature here too, she asked us to think about one morning, if we had something to say to our younger self, what would you tell your younger self? This is what I would tell my younger self. Remember me. Remember me before the clenching of your jaw, the grinding of teeth, living without papers, with uncertainty. Will we ever see our family? Remember me, clutching the Care Bears lunchbox across the airports, a decision not your own to leave la tierra que te vio nacer, all that you know, joining Papa in Nueva York. Sorry, it gets more difficult every day to read this poem as when you consider everything that's happening. Remember me before English gnawed away at your insides, the way to make your teacher smile, to make your parents so proud. Who knew the silencing of Spanish could be so loud? Remember me before religion's chokehold on memory, limiting who and how we could love, the eso no es de Dios euphemism, for there is no room for that in the Lord's home. Remember me as you walk in gratitude for the family you've created, the tios de Argentina, your first neighbors in Queens, amigas de Salvador y Guatemala, singing with you in the church's worship team. Caribbean students, teachers, and friends embodying a supportive community. Remember me and breathe. You no longer have to try to hold it all in. immigrant children trying to meet the expectations of many. You are not your resiliency. Thank you, thank you. So that's my mom and I getting on a plane, leaving Santiago, Chile, to go to Spain with a layover in New York, and that's how we made it to New York. So long story short, I lived my entire elementary schooling as an undocumented child, navigating things that I didn't know what was happening and why were we afraid. So I tackle a lot of that fear throughout some of these poems in this book. And then I also did not have bilingual support or as a formal schooling, let's say, in a program. There was no bilingual program at my PS13 school in Corona, Queens at the time. They have it now, though. So my dad, on Saturdays, they would walk me to school, Escuela Argentina, and I would have all this instruction all day in Spanish. And it was like Argentinian culture, Argentinian music. And this was me in Chile with my mom. We were very involved in our folklore and traditional Chilean folkloric dancing there in Chile. And so every chapter in the book begins with me going into my own history and what it was like to be a child navigating schooling here, having come from Chile. And then I proceed to tackle these themes, right, of migration and immigration, and I bring in documentaries, I bring in conversations about why people might leave their home. And then I tie that into writing. So those of you who are really into, like, how do you craft curriculum and lessons? I have a student who's Anna in my Pearls, two of my Pearls class this semester, but Anna is like super interested in like thinking how people are crafting curriculum. And I think about her a lot when I go through this, because here it is for you, for those of you who are like, how do you craft your objectives and thinking about what you teach? So I was putting these texts together and thinking about documentaries, thinking about poetry, and featuring a lot of my goal with this book is how can I talk about things that have been silenced or people don't want to talk about. So whether it is Blackness and Latinidad, or whether it is migration, or whether it is the complexities around migration and how I can bring in different voices, or maybe it's that I want, as someone who is documented now and having lived my childhood undocumented, I always say that I recognize the privilege that I have in certain spaces, not in all, but in certain spaces, and then I also think about the students who might not be comfortable in spaces because they haven't been made to feel that they can desahogarse, like the children that I featured earlier, right? They're writing. So I always bring in fantasy and say maybe fiction, science fiction, fantasy books might be a way to escape while still helping us grapple with reality. It's kind of like why I'm a big fan of Parable of the Sower and Octavia Butler, right? And so I feature The Grief Keeper by Alex Villasante, who tackles the topic of immigration through the protagonist who is told that they can only remain in the U.S. if they take in the grief of other people. So I'm really grateful for this work, and I'm currently working on the teacher's guide for this book because it's coming out in paperback in 2 or 3 months. So I'm really grateful that the author has reached out and we're collaborating on that. I think about mental health, and that's another topic that our community sometimes doesn't really tackle, and I bring in surveys from GLSEN, a lot of videos on the youth mental health crisis, and our former, I can't remember the poet laureate dates, but our Ada Limon, the poet laureate, work around this, and thinking about, there's a beautiful middle grade novel that I have here if you want to check it out. Ivelisse explains it all. It's about a protagonist, a middle grade child who lost their father and is seeing a therapist and is on antidepressants, but her grandmother wants to hear none of it. And so how do you tackle the topic of mental health across different generations? And I think Andrea Beatriz Arango does a beautiful job of crafting this story across, that helps us consider the child's perspective. What does a mom do having to be in between of the grandmother and the child? And how do you talk about mental health across different generations? I love Lorraine Avila, no tiene pelo en la lengua. Like, she says it like it is. And this book tackles school violence, and in a way that helps me consider what it feels like to be a teen in these times. And thankfully, she's crafted a character who has this, I think it's called the Brave Space Club, and where youth can talk about what they feel, and it reminds me of spaces here on campus, whether it's ESO, thanks ESO for I see you here, BLMI, PRA. Like, I think about the clubs on campus and the spaces where I'm hoping all of you students have a space and a community to go to, especially in these times. So I think this book is really pushing me to think about that. Chapter 4, I'm not going to go through all the chapters. I just wanted to shout out some of them, and I just wanted you to see what those look like so I could turn it over to our students as well. But I also think about the topic of language, and you might recognize here Professor Mena. Hey, shout out Professor Mena. So I watch your videos, Professor Mena. They're really good. So for those of you who don't know, Professor Mena in Puerto Rican Latinx Studies has a YouTube channel called The Social Life of Language. And so I feature one on translanguaging, and I do a whole lesson like breaking it down on how I would teach that. And so I put that in conversation with two of the contributors who are in Mexico, who discussed indigenous languages in Mexico, the many hundreds of indigenous languages in Mexico, and bringing in Cuban American poetry, Haitian author Marie Arnold, Salvadorian poet Jessica Salgado. All are helping me expand and think about language and bilingualism and multilingualism. So that's my chapter on that. And I really want to push against the whole narrative of like resilience. And so I do that in chapter 6 and also in chapter 5. I think a lot about the complexity of our identities. And so I wanted to bring in graphic novel Frizzy, Rizos, American Street by Albizu Boy, who was here on our campus and who's actually coming back this is March. So end of this month, I forgot the date, but find me online and I'll share it. The Haitian Studies Institute is featuring Albizu Boy, 24th? March 24th, thank you, March 24th. So Albizu Boy will be in conversation with Edwidge Danticat. Yes, oh, it's gonna be amazing. And finally, I was pushed to consider In the Heights, in different complexities of the In the Heights latest film with students who I was teaching 7th and 8th grade. And so we had great conversation. And I was like, you know what, I think I want to tackle this here. And I surrounded with a lot of poets in my life. So let me take a deep breath, have some water. That was a lot. So that's a little bit, it gives you a taste of what the book features, like the different poets and topics. And every chapter, like I said, ends with educators. So we have Raul Vaquero, who I'll show you some of Raul's work, a high school New York City teacher, Anel Rivera Guerrero up in Westchester, working with young people there. Cora Zayas is in New York City public schools, overseeing the curriculum for multilingual learners. Brenda Lee Torres is working in the Bronx with several schools, and Enrique Lopez Pino is in a school in Manhattan. And Raul was my student at Bank Street. Enrique was my student at Hunter. And so I'm hoping that in my next book, I could feature my Brooklyn College students. Right? Yes. Okay, great. That's where we're going. So the testimonios that I wanted to share with you today, we have joining us Miguel Figueroa. Miguel is a Puerto Rican Latinx Studies major here at Brooklyn College and is also the vice president of our Brooklyn College Puerto Rican Alliance. Yes. Miguel is also taking several classes, but I know from this semester we are learning together and reading together in our banned books course. Maricruz Sanchez Hernandez is a 5th grade dual language bilingual ed teacher. She was a BC student, a childhood bilingual ed with a Pearls concentration. And she sent a video. I'm going to play it for you. She could not be here because there's school events happening at this time. Same as Raul. Raul Vaquero also has some school events and could not make it today. But he's a high school global literature teacher. He is the immigrant liaison and the DACA student club teacher. So Raul is busy and doing all the great work as well as everyone else at the International High School at Union Square. And we do have here in person joining us as well with Miguel, we have Manuel Martinez Valdez, who is also a childhood ed major like Maricruz was, with a bilingual extension and a Pearls concentration. So I'd love to invite Miguel and Manuel here to join me. And as they join me, I'm going to play the video before so you could watch it. Actually, no. Yeah, I'm going to play the video before and then I'll call you. So that way you could see it before Miguel comes here. So these are just a few. I want you to see what a classroom looks like. Like, it's not enough just to talk about education. What does it look like? So this is Maricruz. So there's the skill and the strategy. I can identify, that's the skill, what's the strategy? By doing something. My goodness, I'm exhausted just like watching her videos. Like, this is a lot of work, right? So it's almost set up the different languages. You're thinking about different topics. And then Raul, some of you might recognize Raul and you recognize some of these pictures because Raul is featured in the wonderful book that you all need to get, Until We're Seen, Public College Students Expose the Hidden Inequalities of the COVID-19 Pandemic. So there's Raul in the center. This is Raul in the center too with his students. And some of the way he uses these kind of themes in his writing is that he creates a lot of text sets. Like the way I created a text set with poetry and middle grade and YA, he uses a lot of graphic novels as well as poetry, and then his students go off and like create their own. So they read a graphic novel, they create a graphic novel. They read a poem, they write a poem. And so a lot of his work is about being strategic with selecting texts that the students will then want to use as examples. Then I'll stop right there because I want to give a chance for Miguel and Manuel to come up here and share their experience. And go ahead. Then we can start, Miguel, with you. Tell us a little bit about some of the themes that this book brought up to you in your life. Yeah.
How's this? Can you guys hear me all right?
Should we hold it or keep it there? Oh, it's good? Okay, good.
but I thought it was very cool that you started with that bit about resiliency and how the idea is very flawed, and then you went on and like showed an actual lesson plan for it. That, and then also your personal testimonios, it gave me a much better idea of the kinds of resources that are out there. I grew up, I'm a transplant, I grew up in like a white, very white community, and I felt disconnected from my culture. Like my parents, they were great about that. They were always talking to me about Chilean history and about sort of the culture and histories that I come from, but you know, there are only two people, and there's only so much they can do. So getting to learn about the kinds of resources that exist out there, it was really amazing. It was very eye-opening. And I feel like it validated so much of what my parents taught me and so much of like what my family has taught me that I'm so grateful for. So I really enjoyed the book.
Okay, so I also enjoyed the book. I think that's why I'm here, right? But more specifically, I was reading chapter 4, and with translanguaging, the first lesson, I really liked how we got to see Dr. Mena's YouTube channel mentioned, because I took his class and I watched his video, right? The video is like made to be accessible to everyone. So I definitely I enjoyed watching the YouTube video explaining what translanguaging was, then read it in like a 60-page paper. But part of that is that because it's accessible, we can incorporate it into our classrooms. And something that I was reading before the actual lesson was how translanguaging isn't often welcome in schools. And like I've seen it in like my fieldwork, right? There's always the English side and the Spanish side, right? And for me, the clearest example is like word walls, right? In my fieldwork, I've always seen word walls, the English one and the Spanish one. And like Dr. España mentioned, it's always blue and red for some reason. I don't know why, but those are the two colors. And to me, it just raises a question, which we're like, I've seen teachers say, you guys have a superpower. You speak 2 languages. But it's never so by that logic, I have 2 superpowers because I speak English and Spanish, but not really one because I never connect them together. So then to me, seeing that, I was like, wow, why can't we have a word wall with both languages, right? Especially because the Spanish and English alphabet kind of go, A is A, B is B, with the exception of ñ, right? So why can't we put both words? Because in my mind, there's not my English word wall and my Spanish word wall, right? So to me, that translanguaging section was really important because it's something that I was able to see, wait, I can incorporate this in my classroom. And now I have a plan on how to do it. I don't have to, like in Spanish, like there's the saying, quebrarme la cabeza on how I'm going to put this into my classroom. When it's in the book, all I would have to do is adjust it to my students.
Yeah, I'm glad y'all reading it. This is good. Y'all can hear me right? Yes, this works. So in thinking about, just working backwards on translanguaging, for me, it was important to feature middle grade young adult literature and poetry that was an example of the way bilingual and multilingual people communicate, right? That there isn't this strict language separation, but that we have these, or what Coral Zayas, one of the testimonios featured in the book, she's created physical spaces in schools and calls them the purple zones. Like, what might a purple zone look like if you brought in, all your languages and got to use them? I was once visiting a school in Chicago, north of Chicago, in Mundelein, in a suburb of Chicago, and I was doing this writing workshop where I showed the students a moment that I wrote about when I came to this country. So it was called The Layover. that was supposed to be just a layover. And so I show my writing, and then I ask the middle grade students for feedback. And you know, a 6th, 7th, 8th grader is going to tell you like the truth. So they had so much feedback on my writing that, I mean, that must have been like 2012, and now we're 2025, that I felt confident like 10 years later to publish it after middle school students gave me their feedback. So they gave me feedback, and I was like, thank you so much. I'm going to revise this. Now it's your turn. And I said, you can have some writing time. And I walked around, and the student raised her hand at the back of the class. I go there, and there's a teacher in every table with students. So I was like modeling a lesson, and all the teachers are watching and working with students. And the student that raised their hand, I go, and I said, yeah, do you have a question? And she says, can I also include Spanish here? Of course you can. And it was this aha moment for the student, but it was this aha moment for the staff. And then in the conversations I had with the administration too, like, what is your language policy? Because sometimes it might not be this language policy that's written, but it's unwritten, right? And we have to talk about that. And so I think that's powerful that you picked up on that. And then also thanks, Miguel, for that, for describing it as generative, because it is for those of us who are educator activists or scholar activists, and you think about, what's my role in speaking truth to power? So I'll end with this so that we can move on to your questions. But Professor Ernest Morel, years ago, he was the National Council of Teachers of English president, and he was also my professor. So I took a class with Professor Morel, and he writes a lot about critical media pedagogy and all these great things in education. And in this class, I was in his class the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted for the murder of Trayvon Martin. Right, so it was a difficult day to be a student. And I say this because a lot of you students here and those of you watching online have many difficult days as students where you're grappling with not just like what's on the syllabus and what's the reading for class, but also like how do you navigate this world? And so in that moment, I'm so grateful that Professor Morel created space for us to desahogarnos, right? We can release, and speak about how we were feeling that day. But also he said, your activism will sometimes look like a Diego Rivera mural. Have you all seen pictures or been in person to see Diego Rivera murals? They're massive. They're in your face. It's like takes up so much and tells a whole story across like huge, right? In such a huge space. So Ernest Morel said, your activism sometimes will be like Diego Rivera murals, and sometimes it'll be like a Frida Kahlo portrait or painting. And Frida Kahlo, maybe you go to MoMA and you'll see like Frida Kahlo, right? It's like very small and it's so impactful. And that's how I see a lot of my work, that sometimes I might not be able to like make it to the protest or the rally or go to Foley Square, but I can be with my child at home multitasking. I'm like playing with her and she goes to bed and I could write. And I think a lot of us, professors who are parents are also thinking about like, okay, now the child goes to bed, now I can like write. And so I think about this word generative, and thank you for using that, as I see my work as both like I'm going to name the systems that are wrong and that are not doing the right things by children in schools, and I'm going to provide you with some example lessons or some literature that'll help accompany us so we're not alone in this. So thank you for those comments, but I want to open it up, right? I think we have time for some questions, and please, if you want to ask, we got Miguel, Pearl's major, Manuel in education, so we'll open it up for questions. And if any of you who are watching online want to use the YouTube chat feature, just make sure you're like, I think you have to be signed in or something, but you can also post your questions online and we will respond.
Taking us on this journey, right? It was your teaching journey, but also this life journey that has brought you to this place.
Yes,
So
I did want to leave you with, because I get questions about this sometimes in case somebody online asks. Oh no, stay right there in case. Oh, actually, no, you're right. You can't see. I can't think about that. In case, I often get asked about timeline. So for those of you who are working on books or interested in publishing, I started the book idea at the Highlights Foundation's retreat when I was writing that Remember Me poem, and that was November 2022. And then I didn't write between November and June because I was teaching and life happens, and I was working on other articles and things. And then in the summer, I worked on my proposal, sent it in that summer, and then signed the contract that fall, and just wrote December to June. But shout out to the faculty fellowship for publication. FFPP, that gave me time with Aaliyah. We were in that together, so I took a semester to work on my on the book and design in the summer, and it came out December 30th. So it was pretty quick, but it was very quick. And my editor, Terry Thompson with Routledge Stenhouse, was super supportive of this. And for those of you asking for recommended resources, Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival has a database with books that you can check out, and you could search for picture books, early readers, young adult novels, and they have a storyteller conference held at the Scholastic headquarters downtown in Manhattan in September. So come up and talk to me about it. I attended last year. I'm going again because it helps me with my own writing, as I'm still working on a YA and a picture book. It's coming. This is the collection that Aaliyah mentioned in the bio. Penguin Random House reached out to Lucia Di Herrera and we had co-authored our first book together, and they asked us if we could put together some book lists. So we put book lists together on these topics, all on books that are published in English but feature different languages, whether it's a Nigerian character in Ikenga and it features Igbo, or it's a Filipino character in Patron Saints of Nothing and features Tagalog. So I had so much fun because I would get home every week. I had a box of books waiting for me. It's like best project ever. And so I'm happy to chat books, recommend lists. It comes with the handbook. And of course, all the courses that I've been mentioning and shouting out, I have them on my website. So just go to carlaespaña.com, and the syllabus is there for each course, and the readings are linked. So they're all OER courses for you. Check them out. But we also have more courses. I wish I could take them all. So please come up right now. We're going to spend some time. I'd love to get to know you. I have some books, and also on the piano, the books that I featured in the books if you want to check them out. And we have the information on the courses that we're offering in the fall. We do have the joint Caribbean literature course that we offer for those of you who are also interested in more of this talk with literature. And teachers, those teachers watching, and those of you who are possibly graduating this spring and will be transitioning to your classrooms, the New York Public Library has a teacher residency every summer. And this summer, their theme is languages, mother tongues or languages. I will be there the first day to launch it with them. It's in July, and you get $1,000 for participating. And you get all these materials and get to learn about archives at the library. So thank you. I appreciate all the support. We have questions, yes. You know, I could talk about resources all day, but you have class after this, or a common hour, or whatever we have. Yes. Oh, who's there? Our Pearl's library liaison, Beth. Hello, Beth Evans. Woo!
Thank you, Carla. It was delightful. You're so organized, as always. You do beautiful presentations. The artist in you is always apparent. But yeah, since it slipped out that I'm a librarian, I'm here with my colleague, Mariana Regalado, also a librarian who happens to be bilingual English-Spanish. So we're very proud of that. I'm sure she is. But since I'm one of the librarians in the room, I can't help but to want to return to the topic of banned books.
Yes, please.
Came up, and I just was Googling, which is what librarians do when they're sitting in conferences and stuff like that, and trying to get their phone to read their fingerprint. But I was just, because I was interested in the statistics of how many banned books are actually children's literature, and the shocking number is that in a recent study, an academic study, 59% of all banned books were children's books. And so that's, you know, I mean, even if you're not a teacher, if you're a parent and you think about, well, those are the books I'm going to bring home and read with my children. But more disturbingly, or not surprisingly, is that so many of these books that a majority, okay, so not only are most of the banned books children's books, but no surprise, authors of color, yes, particularly women of color, were far more likely to be banned compared with white authors. Authors of color wrote 39% of banned books in the study, and women of color alone penned about a quarter of them. So I think that, you know, considering what's going on, yes, in the larger environment now, I think we really need to stay aware, come out and support authors, and make sure that if we don't buy the books, the library will be buying them, but, you know, get a hold of these books, share these books with young people, because so many of them are the books that are written for young people. And it's so important. I'm just so grateful that you do the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, for the stats and that for the background. Yes. So a lot of what I say is go to your local independent bookstore, check out the books there, go to your local public library, request the books if they don't have them. That's really important.
Just want to add. Hey, that was so amazing. Thank you. And I love the book display. I'll just say I've read a bunch of these books because growing up, I didn't have access to those books. And I love the genre. So even as a totally grown person, I would sort of highly recommend other folks reading them. And they're a lot of fun. And you learn a lot. I had two questions. One is really, is this sort of uninformed, but now I can't even remember the name that you used. Like code switching and translanguage. Like what's the difference there?
That's the lesson right there that Manuel was talking about from Professor Mena's video. Yes, in short, because of the time that we have left, we love, and this is what I learned from Professor Mena and Professor Garcia, my mentor, and what we talk about in our classes, that like a translanguaging perspective is what an insider would describe as somebody who is bilingual or multilingual. It says, I navigate through a language repertoire that includes, like for me, I'm from Chile, so I have features of Chilean Spanish, but I came here when I was 5. Right. And so I was surrounded by communities that spoke different varieties of Spanish, from Puerto Rican Spanish, different parts of Puerto Rico, different parts of the Caribbean. And then I became a teacher on 135th in Amsterdam. So like my students reflected the varieties of language there. And so I say as an insider who is bilingual, hopefully multilingual, my next is Arabic. Like my dream is to learn Arabic. I would love to. That's mine. So, let's talk. Mm-hmm. The other Professor Carla Santa Maria, so insider, translanguaging, we see it as one language repertoire. Outsider might say you're switching a code because you're going from one to the other. So that's a short way of putting it. I'm sure if we, take Professor Mena's class, we'll get a much, elaborated description. So that might be the one way we describe it, like our elevator pitch of like whether it's an insider or an outsider who might not see it as like a full one language repertoire. An outsider might not understand. Because there's no switch. Manuel put it so lovely, like he doesn't have a word wall that's in Spanish and a word wall that's in English in his head, right? We just navigate it more fluidly. Thank you.
Carla, we have time for one more question. We have like 3 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a question about when you're going out into the world. So there's the people who you're helping with the desahogo, right? They're sort of the release valve. But you also mentioned the administrators and their eyes opening. And for them, it's not a question of letting something out, but more like opening up so they can let it in. I'm just wondering, what kinds of reactions have you gotten? Is it generally positive or positive in the moment, but then they don't follow through? I'm just very curious.
Yeah, so I'll give you some hope. I've had such wonderful opening of people being open to take this information in from administrators in Texas. I want to name that. San Antonio and Austin, I've met so many principals and different types of administrators who welcome me to their schools in person and virtually. And so I've done lots of series with teachers in Texas and administrators saying, oh, we need to revisit like our language philosophy in this building. And that might start visibly by like, what books do you have present? Also, what's the languages that you see when we walk around the building? If your bulletin boards in a school are only celebrating work in English, but your students are multilingual, like what does that say about, do you really see the full student? And so I'm going to give you that hope, but then there have been the disjointed efforts, and this, I've been grappling with this since I was at Hunter for like 10 years. I graduated from Hunter, and then I taught at Hunter as an adjunct, and I was there for a long time. And that was a big disconnect because I was in the graduate school of education, and I was teaching about translanguaging and how we're going to be open to multilingualism. And so there was a philosophy that was taught about language at the college, and then you would visit the school, and the principal, because I did that, I was a bilingual supervisor at Hunter, and I would visit a school in Sunnyside in Queens. You know how many languages are in Sunnyside? And my student she's a first grade teacher, and there's a student who can't communicate the math, it was a math lesson, can't communicate their response or how they did the math lesson in the language of the day. And I don't remember if the language of the day in that dual language classroom was Spanish or English. And then my teacher, my student from Hunter, who is a teacher there, had been told by the principal never to allow students to go across and use their language. Like, it's just, if the language of the day is Spanish, you are speaking in Spanish. Or if the language is English, you cannot deviate from that. And so she had this moment because she saw me, she saw the student, and she went with what the principal said. And so at the end, we always debrief. And I just said, tell me, how did you feel teaching? And there was this feeling, she was like, I felt stuck and I felt bad because the student felt stuck and felt bad. And you saw that, like the kid felt so bad. And so that, I think, is the work that CUNY NYSEB did this. CUNY, New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilingual, has wonderful resources on their website, CUNY NYSIEB. And they had years of a partnership, but they said, in order for us to work as CUNY faculty and support your schools in New York State, we need the support and the buy-in from the administration and the teachers. And so I think that's a model that I've been inspired by, where it's like we want everyone involved. And so that's also what I follow when I'm invited to schools or if I do workshops, is who is going to represent the administration, who is representing the teaching staff. So everyone's on the same page. Thank you. I think did we have? I see, yes. One more. We'll do one more question and then we'll get some books.
I don't look, but I wasn't sure if it was a hello look.
Quickly, I just want to say that I was touched by your poem in a great presentation, and it brought me back to my 90-year-old self sitting in a classroom, and I was writing in Spanish because I didn't speak English, and the teacher telling me, you're not going to learn English that way. You have to write in English. And I felt so shut, that I wasn't going to be able. And she said, the day you write English and you dream in English, that's the day you belong. And that stuck with me, thinking like, when am I going to learn? And I cried, and I really cried that day because I said, I don't think I will ever learn English.
Wow.
And having this really kind of brought me back and reminded me the importance of having this in the classroom is crucial for kids to grow and to become,
Thank you for sharing that.
Accepted.
Yeah. Thank you. That's what we got to combat that. We're not going to let that stand, right? I say my advocacy and the push is that we are not going to let those comments stand in schools or in any spaces, because we all belong. And I think that's a great message to end on. So thank you so much. Yes. Okay. Uno más. Okay, uno más.
Yeah, can you hear me, Bob?
See? Yes, we hear you.
I am so gratified to be here. I am, as you know, a former professor here at Brooklyn College for 43 years.
Woo!
And I remember the fact that one of the key issues about the department and its formation was reach out to community. How do we take, what do they call it, the gown to the town? And one of the things that we saw at that time, I guess you remember back in October 27th, 1974, important day because 50 years later, Trump would address in Madison Square Garden and call Puerto Ricans garbage, right? He didn't, but one of his speakers. And I remember that at that time, we were talking about the idea of how we would reach out with our literature, etc. I remember one of my favorite, I used to teach the course on Puerto Rican literature and Caribbean. I did all that stuff because that's my background also, language. And I remember the work of Tato Laviera, right? I think it's so important after watching Professor España's presentation that the integration of poetry, the integration of theater, music is hugely important, the performing arts, etc., because they speak so much to our reality. For 17 years, I was also a professional musician. I sang and played piano in a group called Conjunto MB. And an issue would come up, an issue that was important in Puerto Rico, like the creation of a super Puerto that was supposed to be a refining complex that would destroy the ambiente in Puerto Rico. So I said, listen, we got to get the musical community together and the artistic and theater community together to address that. And I remember I wrote a song called El Super Puerto No Va, En Borinquen Morirá. And of course I performed it because at that time I was also involved politically with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. which had the, I would say, the good sense of organizing not only in Puerto Rico, but also in the diaspora. Because after all, one of the things about Puerto Rico is that we have a divided nation, right? Although some people don't even consider that we're a nation, right? So I'm saying that the importance of all this work that Professor España is doing, I am the president of the Alliance for Puerto Rican Education and Empowerment. I stay in touch with everything that you guys are doing, and I send you stuff all the time after what we're doing. One of the things that I want to invite you to is that we're having a tertulia on March the 29th. It's going to be at our place. We have 3 tertulias planned. The first one is the integration of the theater arts in creating the identity and creating a social awareness among our youth. And these are, it's being done by Amneris Morales, a former actress in Puerto Rico who now heads the Bronx Independent Productions in El Barrio. And she's working with Latinx students and all that who have all kinds of problems with their families, many with drugs, disconnected from family, and using theater as a way to create not only the discipline to stay in school and all that, but also to create identity and all that. And all that has to be brought together with the wonderful work that you're doing. And I am saying that it's very important that the complete outreach to community, but also to the performing arts. I'm sure that Professor España loves Latino music and salsa music and all that. And that has, right now, because of Bad Bunny, mind you, we have been doing that before, but Bad Bunny, who is now an international star, has brought this issue to bear in the very question of what's happening to Puerto Rico, its identity, its status, etc. So just to say that I'm very gratified.
That information so I could send it out and people will find out about the tertulia. Thank you.
Yes, you're on my list.
I get all your emails. I got Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And I know it's to wrap up, I did want to end on, remember the pictures of the classroom I showed you? With the books in blue and red and all that stuff? Well, that classroom was my 6th grade classroom. This is a teacher who was teaching that 6th grade classroom. She's also my former Hunter College student. So my former student from a graduate program is now teaching the class I left. So it means a lot to me. And she's in a series that I'm doing with New York City public school teachers on this next book that's coming out that I co-authored with Luz Yadir Herrera called Libros Solidarios, Teaching Language and Building Community with Latina Children's Literature in Spanish. So a lot of questions we get are like, can we get this in Spanish? I'm like, here you go. It's coming about mid-August by Brooks Publishing. And I'm so happy that these teachers from Don Pedro Albizu Campos School are in my series and I get to see them often. And this was us last week or 2 weeks ago. We were reading A Seed in the Sun, a novel in verse in Spanish. So thank you all for your support, and I'll be here talking books, and come join us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And thank you, Wolf. Thanks, Wolf team, for everything.
Thank you, Dr. España. Congratulations. So we invite you